All right. Welcome back to the History on Drugs podcast. I hope you're well. Hope you're doing all right. Hope you're not too stressed out. A lot of crazy stuff going on in the world. Crazy stuff. Not good. Much of it not good, but you know what? I'm here to take you out of that space for a minute, a little over an hour, and travel to some other spaces in the past. Today, I've got a great guest. I've got Graham Harding on the show today. Graham is the author of Champagne in Britain, 1800 to 1914, How the British Transformed a French Luxury. Graham is an independent scholar, connected still to Oxford University where he studied. And he's a really interesting guy. We met up in London last spring. I was there on my European sojourn. My last episode was recorded in the Netherlands. This one was recorded in London. I was still sick too, by the way. I don't sound great in this interview, but luckily I don't talk that much, so you don't have to put up with it for too long. Though you will hear the echoey sounds of the rented apartment where we did the interview. It doesn't sound as good as it would sound if we did it here, but it's hard to get my European guests into my basement in Cincinnati, Ohio. So there you go. In any case, it was great talking to Graham. He's a really interesting guy. Before he did his doctorate in history and wrote this great book, he had been working in the world of business as a brand consultant and a market researcher, basically in the marketing racket for many, many years, and really enjoyed it. He talks a lot about it in this interview. And in fact, I was really interested to know how somebody goes from that kind of world back to the academic world. And he ended up writing a book about the development of champagne as a luxury good in Britain, and how it was marketed in this way, and how marketing basically turned it into this luxury good. It's really, really fascinating, actually. It's a really fascinating story if you're interested not only in champagne and alcohol and so forth, but also in the development of marketing and how these big companies get us to desire things. This is a good interview for you. You should enjoy it. So we'll get to that in just 1 second. One little announcement. We are on Instagram now. History on Drugs is on Instagram. Actually, we got on Instagram a few months ago, but it took me several months to really decide to do something about it. But I've been doing something about it, trying to post stuff, posting little snippets from interviews, accompanied by video or images and that sort of thing, so you can get a little taste of interviews maybe you haven't heard before. Short snippets, like a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes, that sort of thing. I'm really enjoying it, actually. I was on Twitter. My publisher many years ago asked me to do some social media, and so I had been on Twitter. And boy, I really don't like Twitter. And but Instagram, it's nice. Things come across my feed I'm actually interested in looking at, so it's cool. I'm enjoying it, and I haven't become an Instagram junkie as far as I can tell yet. Not yet. But anyway, if you can follow us there, I always ask people to like and subscribe, and I don't know how many people actually like and subscribe. But follow us on Instagram and repost our stuff. Like it and repost it. That would be cool and helpful, and that's an easy way to get the word out about these great conversations. And I got a bunch of other ones coming up. I've got some great interviews lined up over the next couple of months. I've got a couple in the can that you're going to love. So those are coming your way. We'll bring them to you soon. I don't come out every week because, I'm a one-man operation here, and I like to do my interviews in person. No Zoom. So keep your eyes out and your ears out, especially. I guess you don't really need to. I guess if you're on the Instagram, you keep your eyes out. Keep your ears out for more podcasts coming your way. In any case, I think that's all I got for you. It's really cold out. Try to stay warm. And take a break now. How about taking a break from the news and all the bullshit out there and the horrible? And just listen to a conversation between two people talking about some interesting stuff. And again, apologies for the sound of my voice in this, but there was nothing I could do about it. All right, with that, let's turn to my conversation with Graham Harding. So I'm really excited to talk to you. As you know, I loved your book.
It's good of you to say so.
Yeah, no, I loved your book, and thought it was just so well done, and I mean, good history, really well done. Also, if I'm not mistaken, I think you said I don't remember now. It's been over a year since I looked at it, but I think you said weren't you in marketing before or something?
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, so I'm excited to hear about
I'm
that.
a late life. Well, back to history as a late life exercise and entertain. Well, entertainment's the wrong word because it's been wonderful. I've made lots of friends all over the world. Got involved in all sorts of projects. So I'm doing a wine museum in Verona, doing a Pinot Noir conference in Oxford in July.
Nice.
So there's all sorts of stuff that's come out of this, which is just completely unexpected bonus.
Yeah. Well, that's the fun part. I would just had this great conference in the Netherlands, and it was one of these things where you just keep getting benefits from having done some work that people liked or whatever.
Yeah.
That's
So what were you presenting on?
So the conference was on, and by the way, when I'll be looking down at this just to check the levels and stuff. Don't worry about it. I'm just keeping an eye. The conference was on indigenous drugs in Latin America, mainly psychedelics, though there was some discussion of coca as well, a little bit of tobacco talk and so forth, but mainly about psychedelics in Latin America. And actually I started my presentation talking about how I didn't know what I would talk about for the conference because I don't really work on psychedelics, and the main drug I work on in Latin America is cannabis, which isn't indigenous to Latin America either. They were interested in hearing from me because I've written about the broader history of drugs in Latin America, what Paul Gutenberg and I have called the new drug history of Latin America. And so they wanted me to talk a little bit about that. And so I ended up talking about putting this psychedelic renaissance that's going on right now, putting it into historical perspective. Okay. And it was a terrific conference. I met some people I didn't know at all, and saw some old friends. It was great. And I always love coming to Europe, and it's been, I think 2018 was the last time I was there. So it's been a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of change since then, really.
Yeah. So I like to kind of start from the beginning and hear about, and especially with your interesting trajectory. So, because I'm interested in how people become historians. Yeah. But you've got a roundabout route. So can you tell me a little bit, where were you born? Where did you grow up? That sort of thing.
I grew up in rural Essex, county on the east of England. Got a scholarship to Cambridge to read history. Did 3 years, got a double first. Started doing research, but in medieval history. But it was the wrong subject, probably the wrong supervisor. A very distinguished historian who has been compared to Pope Innocent III for his, or was compared to, he's now long dead, for his manipulation and abruptness and difficulty as a person to work with. So I won't identify him. And what I was doing research on medieval universities in Italy. But I wanted to do something very different from what he wanted to do. So I did 3 years, gave it up, went into publishing, did 10 years as a publisher, finishing up producing computer software games for kids, produced the only educational game ever to make the national top 10 of the charts, which we did by fiddling the charts, I suspect. At least that's what the sales director at the time implied. And then I finished up working for an ad agency, came in one, they said, come and join us, and then they took me out for lunch the next day and said, join us on a permanent basis.
Huh. Why? So, well, how did that happen? I mean, how did you even get?
They had done a project for us as a publisher, looking at what new media publishing. They'd done this, and I liked the lunches, I liked the chat, I liked the speed that everything went at. I liked the girls, and it was just a sort of perfect. Just seemed a really nice place to work. Yeah. So they said, come in, come and say hello, come and talk to the team. So I did that with them because I rang up various people and said, any chance for a job? And they said, yeah, fine.
And and how old are you at this point?
How old was I? I was mid-30s.
Mid-30s at this point. All right.
So I'd done 10 years in publishing.
Okay.
And it's a agency which was a creative development agency, did some ads, but also did a lot of other stuff, quite a lot of consumer research in mostly food that I was working on, food and cars. But the company got into slight difficulties, I think, really, and they decided that they wanted to sell the business to somebody, sell it on. And what clearly they wanted out of us was to become a more traditional ad agency. And three of us decided that that's not what we wanted to be.
Yeah.
So I got recruited into this bunch of, I'll say three of us. So we set up our own agency to do what we'd been doing, but not advertising at all. So it was marketing, branding, strategy, underpinned by a lot of consumer research, both heavy numbers, but also qual research. Just talking to people about how they found a restaurant experience, what they thought about a chicken Kiev, all sorts of stuff like that. And so that business, which we set up, Value Engineers, we ran it, ultimately two of us, for 20 odd years. And then
it was called Value Engineers.
The Value Engineers.
The Value Engineers.
Every now and then we met real value engineers who got very upset about us borrowing their name. But we thought it was a fantastic blend, because what it had the hard engineering, so it was the data side of the business, it was the serious research side of the business, and we'd finished up doing global segmentations for people like Sony. We had that, but we also had the soft side, the values. So the logo was a scientific flask with flowers growing out of it. And that, we tried to always have that blend of hard and soft data and insight in everything that we did. So I did a lot of work on mobile telcos, on technology, on food, on drink, but not wine. Alas, there wasn't very much. Well, there was obviously wine around, but not many people were branding it in any way that was interesting as far as we were concerned, or that they would be willing to pay for us to work on.
Okay, so I don't know this world at all. So now I've got questions. I think you said you wanted to do everything you were doing, but no advertising.
That's right.
And so you're doing marketing but not advertising.
That's right.
So what does that mean? I don't know.
What it meant was it went right back to, if you go through the value chain, how do we create new products? So we were working for Pizza Hut at the time, and we created the ice cream factory in Pizza Hut. So this was a sort of serve yourself ice cream bar that kids could buy into and get their favorite dose of ice cream with sprinkles or sparkles or with chocolate drops or whatever. Yeah. So we did a lot of new product development.
I see.
So I did the first UK-based pay-as-you-go mobile phone proposition, and so that was one end of the deal. Then the next end, or the next bit, was thinking about how you work with major retailers. If you're a relatively small player in a marketplace, even if you're quite a big player in a marketplace, if you're dealing with companies like Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda, Walmart, how do you get them to see things through your eyes? How do you define success in ways which you as an agency can develop? So always trying to set the gold standard. So we finished up doing a lot of what we called then customer marketing. So working with big retailers and food producers mainly, Unilever, which took a lot of power, Dairy Crest, which was then the biggest dairy company in the UK, and doing things like reshaping the cheese fixture. Because we would go to the retailer and say, look, we know what it is that people are now looking for in the cheese market. This is the sort of assortment they want. This is the sort of information they need. So that was about, okay, what do you put on the pack? So one of the things I worked on was a strength guide for cheese, because people in consumer groups would say to us, I'm not quite sure. I like cheddar, but I don't know about these cheeses. I don't know what they're going to taste like.
Yeah.
Will my kids like them?
Yeah.
So we created the flavor spectrum for that. So you could go and okay, my kids like strength 2.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's another 2. We can try that. So it's de-risking, but also thinking about the way consumers buy, looking at what's the retail cliche is eyeline is byline.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you make sure that your client, our clients' products are on the byline and not right at the bottom of the bottom down by the floor?
Yeah.
So it's stuff like that, and using space planning techniques to get the retailers to see this.
Okay.
So I don't know whether the term Quorn means anything to you.
Mm-mm.
Quorn it was developed by a firm in England, a food firm, but it was and still is now. It's very very widespread really now through the world. But it's sort of a cross between tofu and soya. Actually, it was built from mushroom. Basically, They found some plant underneath the quite close to us, 50 feet down, some strands or something, which they grew. They nurtured, they grew into a food product, and it had lots of advantages versus soya and tofu. You could imbue it with flavour. Well, the thing with soy at the time was you take one bite and the flavour goes. With this product, Quorn, you could chew it like meat, and it would just carry on releasing flavour as you ate it. So, but this is a new product. How do you get this into a retailer? How do you persuade them? So the answer was, what we have to do is we have to create pies, sausages, burgers, things that people knew, formats they recognised, but with a vegetarian, non-meat option to it.
Like the Beyond Burger or whatever.
So it's anticipating then a lot of what's happening now.
Sure.
So we did stuff like that. Anyway, so that was all.
And
great
when were
fun.
these? What year was it? Like, when were you working with? So you were started mid-30s.
We started the business in 86.
Okay.
Ran it for about, my partner and I ran it for about 20 odd years.
Okay.
So this was really in the 1990s. We were doing most of this stuff.
Yeah.
1990s, early 2000s.
Okay.
But I know I had a major heart operation, and thought, okay, this is now the time to pull back. So we did the earn out. We acquired enough money to give the staff some very generous bonuses and walk away with something for ourselves as well. So I thought, okay, now what? I thought, so I did a couple of years of non-executive director jobs, chairing small businesses, small consultancy businesses, which was fun, and I still do some of that, but it wasn't enough.
Yeah,
it wasn't enough of I was managing people rather than sort of thinking for myself, and so I thought I'll go back to university.
No, so you're in like mid-50s.
I was in my 60s by this point.
Already in your 60s. Wow.
So I was thinking, first degree in anthropology, or go back to being graduate study in history, but not medieval universities.
Yeah.
And what had happened meantime was my wife bought me a wine course as a birthday present. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. And I said, I'll do the first course, and then that I'm not satisfied.
Right.
Played the first one, the second one, the third one. So finished up doing the WSET diploma. Wrote a book out of that, which sold pretty well in England, in the US.
What's that book called?
Called The Wine Miscellany.
The Wine Miscellany.
Wine Miscellany.
And what was the premise? Is it like a guide to wine, or what is it?
It's a story. It's a series of small stories about wine. So it's a miscellany of the 100-word, 400, 500-word short pieces, most of them less than a page, about all sorts of odd, bizarre, interesting things. So what was James Bond's favourite champagne, which is the highest vineyard in the world? What was Omar Khayyam drinking when he said a flask of wine, a loaf of bread, and thou, my lord, is all I need? So what was he drinking?
Yeah.
Where did Byron find the skull that he supposedly drank out of? And most of these, well, not most of them.
Where did he find it?
He was buried in his garden because he lived in an old priory, which had a religious, presumably had a cemetery or something. I don't know, but I mean, it tells you something. I put wine and sex into Google. Okay, this was 20 odd years ago, 25 years ago, and got, I think, 250,000 hits at that point, possibles. So I looked at the first 5,000, and all sorts of extraordinary stories came out of this. Nothing to do with sex, but something to do with wine.
Yeah.
And so I then got hooked. So I'd come home from work, eat supper, read to the kids, whatever, and then do an hour's sort of internet hunting on all sorts of bizarre terms, anything I could think of, wine and. So I came across a town in southern Italy where the water company had misplumbed the pipes, so the taps all ran with red wine. So all sorts of extraordinary stuff. But what it did, it gave me a feel for that sort of research, looking for the human interest, looking for things that would appeal to people.
Yeah.
So when I went back to I did a master's, went back to Cambridge, did a master's there on the history of Champagne, because I lucked into working at or getting access to the Pommery archives and the Paul Roger archives in Reims and Epernay. And the Pommery was wonderful because they had an agent, a man called Adolphe Aubinet, in the 1860s, who was recruited, supposedly as a family friend of Madame de Pommery, sent off to London. He was clearly a genius marketeer. That's what came across from his letters. Jumping forward a bit, what the book, I hope, shows is that if you look at the way in which champagne is presented today as a luxury product, if you look at luxury products in general, there's a couple of Swiss academics, Jean-Noël Capferrat and somebody, Bastien, and what they put together is a series of rules for luxury branding, contemporary luxury branding. And I can look at each of those rules and say, they were doing this in 1860s London. And what is also fascinating about it, Isaac, is that they didn't have the language. They didn't have the language of marketing. Marketing as a discipline really only starts it starts as a sort of university course, but that was really distribution in the States in 1910s, 1920s, 1930s. And marketing as a sort of discipline with its own language really doesn't come until Procter & Gamble, General Motors start in the 1930s, the beginnings of that marketing system. And the language doesn't really get codified. So what is fascinating, you can see him think, what I've got to do is persuade my bosses in France to take this risky step, because what he said to them was, the key thing about our champagne is that what we cannot have is a customer who buys a product one year but cannot buy it again the next year. He wants the same taste. He wants the wine to taste the same. So that's where the concept of the house blend, the standardized house blend, comes from. So that's one thing he did. Second thing was saying, always increase the average price. That's the current luxury marketing rule. Always increase the price. And what is fascinating is the British Wine Trade magazine in the 1870s, 1880s would be saying, these champagne houses are crazy. They'll destroy the market. Nobody's going to pay these prices.
Yeah.
And then in 1905, the Premier Trade magazine, 95, 1906, did a retrospective on 60 years of the trade. And they said, over the years, we have said many times that the champagne houses are ruining their business. What we have to say now is that every time they raise the price, they sold more product.
Right.
And he said also, stop having lots of bottles labelled Cuvée J, Cuvée X, Cuvée Y, so individual growths from individual vineyards or individual blends that you happen to like. That's irrelevant to the consumers. They don't understand that. What you need to do is to put the Pommery name big right across the bottle. brand it strongly. But he also said things like, what you need to do is to, he persuaded Madame Pommery to invest in art and make a public donation of this. It was a painting by Gustave Courbet, I think, to build her profile. So these sorts of things, and you can say it's absolutely fascinating seeing how he sometimes he uses military language. We cannot divide our forces. We must concentrate our attack.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what he was doing was working with influencers. So he got Madame Patti, who was sort of the Beyonce of her day, to drink champagne, to say she drank Pommery champagne at the interval of her performances, to drink it at her wedding. And these, of course, were publicised.
Sure.
He made sure that the press knew all about these. And he gave wine and made sure people knew it to the Duke of Wellington, stuff like that. And he built up very strong relationships with individual newspapers. So the Daily Telegraph, which was then the world's best-selling newspaper, and Punch, which was the humorous magazine that all middle-class, upper-middle-class Victorian households would read, would subscribe to. And there's a fabulous cartoon that comes in Punch, which was called Our Derby Day Reinforcements. So the Derby Day, the big horse race in the UK, quite close to London. So it was a day out for all of London. And a great deal of champagne was consumed there. So the Derby Day Reinforcements was a sort of series of men dressed up as on horseback, dressed up as soldiers. But instead of rifles, they were carrying bottles of champagne. And the Pommery bottles are front rank. That's what you see when you look at the cartoon. There are others, but they're much smaller. They're less easily visible. And again, as the trade magazine said, this was a genius stroke of advertising.
Yeah.
And all that.
And this is in the 1860s,
70s, 80s. And the other thing that happens, again, jumping forward into champagne, is that in 1860, William Gladstone, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, later Prime Minister, he lowered the tariffs on what he called light wine, so non-fortified, so not port, not sherry. And that gave a huge boost to sales of French wine particularly, some German also, but mainly French wine in the UK. So sales of claret, wine of Bordeaux, sales of champagne tripled in 15 years. And that tripling of champagne has all sorts of effects because in the 1820s, 1830s, champagne was the most prized champagne, the most expensive champagne was still not sparkling because they hadn't really mastered the technology in France of preventing the bottles from bursting, getting strong enough bottles. And I'll backtrack if I may.
Yeah, sure. I was going to ask you to anyway, to go back and kind of explain where champagne stood, like say in the 18th century, so the audience can understand a little bit how it grows, right?
Okay, let's to take a step back then. The thing about champagne is that it's a product of a cold northern province of France. So you get the harvest in, it starts to ferment, and then winter sets in. The cold kills the fermentation, stops the yeast from activating, but there's still sugar in the wine. So there's this wine, it's in barrels, fine. So we're talking 17th century, 16th, 17th century. So being clever guys, the Champagne Noir ship it over to London as soon as the spring storms abate in the Channel. So about now, it would be arriving on the docks in London, in Southampton, primarily. And every now and then, you'd get, a nice day. So the wine warms up, the yeast reactivates, there's still sugar, so it starts to re-ferment. Now, what happens is then that if that happens too much, it bursts the barrel. Oxygen gets in, the wine spoils. But it doesn't always happen that way. At least that, we can't prove this, but that's my sort of view on how this all happens is that people try this stuff every now and then. There's a barrel which has started to re-ferment a little bit fizzy, a little bit of bubbles. Oh, this is good stuff, this. and fun. And then an Englishman, a man called Christopher Merritt, in the 17th century, works out that if you add molasses or anything with sugar to still wine, which has still got sugar in it, it will start to re-ferment. And he did this because he was interested in cider and beer. But it very rapidly becomes apparent that this is what you can do to the wine of Champagne, still wine of Champagne, to make it bubble. And people get the taste for this.
Sure. And this is when? When does
this is the 17th century?
Okay.
So it's pretty expensive because it's an uncontrolled, inexplicable proposition. No, they don't understand the base chemistry. They know that if you do this or this or this, it will have that effect, but they don't understand the base chemistry.
Yeah.
So in the 18th century, yes, it's there as a wine primarily, but say the wine that's really prized is the still wine, and the idea, the Dom Perignon myth. There's a wonderful quote attributed to him. "Come quickly," he says to his monastic brethren, "for I am seeing stars," the bubbles bursting out of the bottle. Yeah. But in fact, he spent his life trying to control that bubbles because it was basically seen as a fault. And with the glassware of the time, you had this phenomenon called la casse, where the bottles break in the cellar. And one bottle breaks and its neighbours break as well. Yeah. So the cellars were built with gutters running down the centre of the floor to collect the wine, which they said was used for vinegar. I mean, we don't know. Yeah. We don't know. Right. But anyway, that's what they said. So as I say, still wine of Champagne, which had been very highly valued for centuries. You can go back a long way sort of into the 13th century, and it was valued then. But that property of bursting barrels was known. So there's an extraordinary 13th century poem on the Battle of Wines, which is essentially a World Wine Awards run for the benefit of the French king of the time, which is the finest wine. So this was a battle, and so a poet writes this up, and the wine that won was the wine of Cyprus. Sweet, glorious, golden, luscious. And Champagne, the wine of Champagne, gets dismissed as Dom Pétard. And Dom Pétard, in modern French, signifies surfactant, because that's what it tended to do to the barrels. These hiccups of gas as it re-ferments. So the property was known, but distrusted. Yeah. Potentially dangerous because you could lose a shipment. Nobody wants to buy, spoiled wine. Right. So if I jump forward, in the 18th century, the French king of the time allows them to export in bottle, and that export in bottle means that suddenly branding becomes possible because you can identify a bottle, whereas a cask, yes, there were marks on the cask which you can sort of read, if you like, as prototype branding in the same way as the marks on amphorae in the wines that were traded in the classical times, prehistory really. But with a bottle, you can mark the cork, you can put on a label. So the prototype of branding, I think, in many ways starts with alcohol. If we jump forward back into the 19th century, if I may, 1860, it's a boom. And the middle classes, because Britain at that stage was
general economic boom, you mean?
General economic boom, as well as a boom in wine. And a new middle class was emerging. They were estate agents, lawyers, accountants, civil servants. So they were not born to money. Right. They'd made it themselves. And what they knew was that if they got an invite to the county ball, organised by the local nobility, the local gentry, then there would be champagne there. They might not be given it, but they could see it as it were on the top table. Okay, we want champagne on our tables because we want to show that we've made it. Yeah. So champagne starts to arrive on the dinner table. And that has two consequences. You want that wine to be the centrepiece of your meal. So that means you need to drink it with savoury dishes. And what does that do to the sugar levels? It pushes them down. Because if you try drinking sweet champagne with roast beef, it's not much of an experience.
Right.
So the wine starts to go drier, as well as the bottle being displayed on the table with the branding there.
Yeah.
Because it's a very noticeable bottle, that champagne bottle shape, the saucer glass, the coupe glass, they're all signs that, this family has made it. They can show off this to their neighbours. And there are stories in Trollope, I think it's Miss Mackenzie, where a dinner party is being thrown and this bottle of champagne has to be carefully guarded and poured out in the right proportions, the right people, the important people on the table. And of course the butler messes it up, the servant messes it up. So the guest of honour gets a tiny dribble,
right?
And the kids get a glassful. No, we've ruined our chances.
Yeah.
So it goes drier because of that. Okay, now look at it from the other side. Look at it from the side of those who have been accustomed to drink champagne, who've had the money, who've had the cultural knowledge, if you like, to drinking champagne. What do? The middle classes have stolen their wine. There's no more expensive wine that they can use that will show off their superiority.
Yeah.
So they go dry and drier and drier. And the Victorian narrative on this was to tolerate, let alone like, really dry champagne, you have to start early and drink often. So that tells you who they are.
Yeah.
And I get my Monsieur Aubinet writing to his bosses in France saying, the wine has to be dry. And it has to be dry because it has to appeal to the wealthy classes. It has to appeal to those who've got that cultural capital as well as the financial capital. And in the course of 20 years, champagne in Britain goes from a dosage, so a sugar level of 12, 15 grams of sugar per litre, to zero, no sugar at all. So this is you need a very good harvest, you need a very good base wine to make this happen, and probably a little bit of natural sugar left in the wine.
I was going to ask, doesn't that? I thought the process that made the champagne work was the addition of the sugar, right?
To kickstart the fermentation.
Yeah. Second
fermentation.
Yeah.
But then, to go back into the process, you have a base wine which is fermented as normal, big vats.
Yeah.
Then it goes into bottles, and you have a vin de tirage, which is sort of a bit of sugar, a package of sugar and yeast, old wine, to kickstart the fermentation in bottle, which is the key differentiating factor with champagne bubbles. It's fermented in bottle, second fermentation. But what happens then is that you get the wine is suffused with dead yeast cells, which left to themselves sink to the bottom of the bottle. So you pour out the bottle, if you have the yeast cells in the bottle, you pour it out and you get a cloudy wine. So that was when they invented in the relatively early 19th century, probably by Veuve Clicquot in her winery. You slowly twist and turn the bottles, slowly inverting them over time. The twisting releases the yeast that is stuck to the side of the bottle. The inverting slowly, the yeast particles drift down into the neck of the bottle. So you've got a little wedge, if you like, of dead yeast cells, an inch maybe in the top of the bottle, right underneath the cork. And then, now it's done mechanically, but then by hand, somebody whips off the crown cork, which is how they essentially use to stop the wine. The pressure of the fermentation inside, the carbonic acid gas, shoots out yeast cells.
Yeah.
You top it up, but you top it up with a sort of vin de dosage, which has got the amount of it's old wine, which has also got sugar in it, cane sugar, natural sugars of some form, and that governs the sweetness of the final wine. Which is why you can have sweet champagne.
I see.
Still today, or you can have very dry champagne.
Yeah.
And that ability to control the sugar levels for different nations So at a point when the British were drinking 1%, 0%, 0.5%, the Russians were probably still drinking 15, 20, 30, 40 grams of sugar per litre. The French were down to about 12 to 15 by that stage. Huh. So the other argument that I make is that it's not just the marketing that gets invented in 19th century London, but it's the style of champagne we drink today. If you think about standard wine today, champagne today, sparkling wine has a sugar level normally between 8 and 12 grams of sugar per litre. You can get drier, you can get sweeter, but that's responsible for 80-90% of the world consumption, brut champagne. Mm-hmm. And that idea of this clear lemon gold or lemon white wine with a sugar level of around 5-6 grams of sugar per litre, that has become the gold standard, the standard of the modern wine industry.
Yeah.
My somewhat presumptuous argument is that a lot of this gets created in London. It's exported, of course, because Britain was importing and exporting wine out to the colonies. So that style becomes known throughout the world, and effectively sets the standard.
Yeah.
And
well, I was just go ahead, finish. I have a question.
The third thing that happens, again, I argue, is that in the 1860s and 1870s, the sort of work done by Ubinet and others in the wine industry in London, often Frenchmen, sometimes Germans, takes crucial steps in transforming what were known house names. People knew the name of Clicquot, they knew the name of Montebello, Maurice Chandon, but these were, they were a guarantee of good stuff, but they were not in any sense brands. And that what happens in the 60s and 70s is that people start to think of them and treat them in a way which we can recognize now as modern branding. So you start to accrue symbolic values as well as functional values. And again, Pommery did this very well, the Clicquot did this well. And what's interesting is looking at how Maurice Chandon responds. Because Maurice Chandon at that stage was the biggest producer, and well known, but they didn't have a properly dry wine, and they didn't have any real symbolic value to the product. They were not the wine of princes. They were the wine of those who were, a little bit more in the middle of the road socially. Yeah. And people start to say in the 1880s, Maurice Chandon's becoming something of a common brand. It's losing its cachet. And Maurice Chandon clearly recognised this, because you then get a series of activities, branding activities, which transform their fortune in the UK market. First thing they do is they launch a dry wine. Uh-huh. Second thing they do, and this is following Pommery, they put a vintage date on it. Because vintage dates were common in still wine, but not in champagne. Individual years were known to be good. 1845, 1848, I think, and others. But this was known in retrospect. Whereas what Ubinet did with Pommery was Pommery 1874, the first vintage dated champagne. And that fulfills one of the other great criteria of luxury branding, the illusion of scarcity. Because at that stage, there were millions of bottles underneath Rouse and Epinay. There was no danger of, running out. So again, a common cachet, champagne loses its edge. But if you put a vintage date on it, suddenly you've lifted it out of the common rank again.
Yeah. And
you've got something which you can charge extra for.
Right.
So Pommery did this with 1874. And, there is still one bottle, I think, left in the Pommery cellars, jealously guarded. Great to look at. And so Maurice Chandon brands, they have a vintage date. They change Brut Impérial, French, to Brut Imperial. English.
Yeah.
Whenever British regiments come back from India after a victorious campaign, Marie Chandon doles out wine to them for their homecoming dinner. The Franco-British exhibition in 1907, 1906, 1907, 1908, they build this giant pavilion right next to the Royal Pavilion. They sponsor articles in the newspapers saying, Marie Chandon is the drink that Oxbridge rowers take after they've had a hard training session. Yeah. Drink champagne after you've been through an intensive rowing spell. And it works fabulously well. And Brut Imperial is still really the flagship wine for Marie Chandon in the UK. So it's this fabulous interweaving of social history. How do people adopt new tastes? What is it that makes it possible to introduce a new taste into your dining repertoire? What are the social dynamics which drive the way that things taste?
Yeah.
Because as you'll know, we can all get used to any taste.
Sure.
That's not the issue. It's what does that taste symbolize in social terms? So that happens. You've got the branding element happening as well, and you've got the sort of the marketing smarts that these people are developing.
Yeah,
and that's why I think it just makes it such a fabulous story.
Sure. Do you think that the champagne market was particularly on the cutting edge, or is the champagne market one of various markets where these things were being developed in the late 19th century, these branding techniques and so forth?
In terms of wine, I'm fairly sure that champagne was the only one doing it. And the reason why is that what you can do with champagne, which you could not, certainly in theory legally do, with still wines, is blend across different years and different vintages. So the big problem for still wine producers in the mid-late 19th century was that you were essentially at the mercy of the weather of that year.
Right.
So if you had a bad harvest, it was still Chateau Latour. But somebody who last year has bought Chateau Latour of some, and it's been a great year, they look forward next year to buying the same thing. And they buy it, and they take nothing like as good.
Right.
Because the weather has not been as good.
Yeah.
And they were not allowed to blend across years. Now, there's a degree of illegal activity going on. So you'd bring in wine from Burgundy or later on bring it in from Algeria to blend with red wine to give it alcohol, give it colour. But you weren't allowed to. What champagne could do it legally. They could blend across years. They could blend across areas.
Yet they could still put vintage dates on there.
Vintage date is only if it is the wine of a given vintage.
All right.
But you can there's scope for a little bit around the edges to
Sure.
play with.
Yeah, sure.
But it was tapping into a habit. Port, claret, Burgundy. People in the know recognised that there were some great years, great vintages.
Yeah.
Champagne had never had that. Suddenly they have that possibility. And they could do it they could create a standard blend, leaving aside the great years, the 1874s, which was a fabulous year for winemaking. They could, by blending judiciously, reserve wines from different areas. They could create a standard taste every year, and that's this idea of the Pommery non-vintage, the Paul Roger non-vintage. You taste it one year, you taste it next year, you should not be able to tell the difference.
Yeah.
And that, of course, that consistency is at the heart of successful branding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The term branding, I don't remember, now I'm not in marketing, so I don't remember really seeing that term very much until about, 20 years ago. Then it became very common. When does it appear? Do you know?
The term branding, this is an unsatisfactory answer because the term branding is used of casks and other such things quite a long way back. So it's trying to work out when, and what I focus on is the word brand, when it starts to shift from meaning a stamp on a cask or a hot iron burnt into the wood, when it stops meaning just a marker on a cask or a barrel, whatever it may be, when people start talking about it as the thing itself. So there's if you look in sort of 19th century newspapers, you see people start saying, these brands are selling at this price range. So the term brand shifts from being purely a mark to becoming the basic of a thing itself. And so by the end of the century, people would talk about brands of champagne, brands of this, brands of the other. But if you, and I've done this, if you look at how the term brand is used and what products it's associated with in the late 19th century, champagne comes out very strongly, but you can begin to see foodstuffs, you can begin to see cosmetics, toiletries, beginning to have the word brand, this brand of butter, this brand of coffee, this brand of soap, become associated. So the term shifts in meaning from just being that stamp on a cask burnt in with hot iron to becoming the thing. I want that brand. That's the crucial change, I think, that happens in the process. Starts in the 1840s. You can just see the beginnings then, but it's really only in the 1870s, 1880s that you see these brands emerging.
And was anybody using it as a verb? Like, because there's one idea, right, is that the brand means this whole constellation of ideas around this thing, right? But the other thing is somebody consciously going, we have to brand this product, right? And I mean, that's the thing that I don't remember people saying until about 20 years ago.
No, I think you're right, Isaac. They don't really use it in that active sense.
Right.
They do it again, but they haven't yet conceptualized.
Right. They're doing it, but
But you get. I mean, what there's a fabulous example. Again, I think in the UK, everybody thinks of Heinz 57 as the world's first range brand. A brand name which covers a series of different products. So it's the 1890s, Heinz starts to do this. But there was a British retailer, Gilbey's, who had somewhere between 10 and 20% of the market for wine. So it was a very dominant player. They had a Castle brand. The Gilbey's Castle brand spanned a whole range of wines. And they had, again, things which we immediately recognize today as part of the brand armory. They had the signature on the label. They had that same emblem, the castle. They had a general statement about the purity and quality of the wines. So they were using quite a lot of interesting what we would now call brand collateral, to make the castle product known right across the UK. And that was the range that was the range brand they used. And I think that's the world's first range brand. Antedates Heinz by about 20 years.
Oh, interesting.
So, from my point of view, there's all sorts of interesting things get thrown up. So this all feeds back into my experiences working in branding from the marketing perspective and marketing consultancy. So I am biased. I recognize this, but
Well, we are all. Really quick question about why the aristocracy. So you talked about the middle class beginning to see the aristocracy drinking champagne in the mid 19th century. Did champagne become a drink of the aristocracy simply because of expense? So it was very expensive because it was so difficult to successfully export it and that sort of thing. Is it just mainly that?
It's partly that. It's also the fact that when champagne gets first adopted in Britain, jumping back again, in the Restoration court of Charles II, who'd spent time in exile in Paris, who had a number of French. There was a sort of a prototype Beau Brummel in the Charles II court, the Marquis de Saint-Evremond, and he clearly had good connections in Champagne, with a capital C, and he starts importing wine, and basically he's acting as a cheerleader for champagne. So champagne becomes a mark of the court.
And this is when exactly?
This is 17th century.
17th century. Oh, okay.
17th century after the English Civil War.
Okay.
The Restoration.
All right.
And he helps cement this image of this being the wine of the nobility, the wine of kings and queens, the wine of royalty. So people always got this sense in their mind, I think, that this is a drink for the elite.
Yeah.
Which is why when the middle class start adopting it,
yes,
the elite get, what do we do?
Sure.
So there's this wonderful concept which is that of bandwagoners and snobs. So the bandwagoners, in this case the middle class, they know that champagne is a bandwagon they can get onto, they can use to climb the social ladder. So they're grabbing champagne. So what do the snobs do, who want to differentiate themselves from the rest of the, this emergent middle class? And that's why I think they go drier and drier and drier and drier, just to prove they can.
Yeah.
So Michel Aubinet at one point writes back to his bosses in France saying, I met that rare thing today, an Englishman who really likes dry wine. So people were drinking dry wine not because they really liked it,
right,
but because it sent a message.
That's right. Well, that's like so many things, right? A lot of these super hopped IPAs. Sometimes I think people drink them just because they want to prove that they're the biggest beer drinker, the greatest connoisseur. So wait, I have a question to go back in your background. So you've got interest in history, and you get into this branding, marketing stuff in your early career. Are there any precedents in your family for either side of this? What did your parents do? Do you have historians or marketers or anything? Or
No, my father ran a local estate agency business, selling houses, selling land. All that I think comes through is that what he was doing was persuading people that he could be trusted, that his knowledge was good, that his judgment was good. And I think that plays into any form of consultancy, that's what you're selling. You're selling the ability to make people trust you, to believe that you can come up with a better solution. And that was it. My mother was swept off her feet by this returning prisoner of war from, he was on the Burma-Siam Railway, my father, the Railway of Death, and he swept my mother off her feet. She was supposedly engaged to an British film star who made it big in America at the time. Oh. Took her to rural Essex, where, there was a local rep theatre, a local cinema. That was it.
Yeah, it's not Hollywood.
Not Hollywood, absolutely not. But much against his wishes initially, she set up a bookshop in a local town when a new University of Essex, gets founded. She sets up a bookstall in the bookshop in big village, small town close by, and ran that. So there was always an interest in books, a love of books in the family, but no marketing, branding, no,
none of that.
But, and this is the but. My father had an office in the 1950s, next door to the office of a man called John Wheeler, who was then, I think, running or partner in what has now become one of Britain's best-known regional wine merchants. So when my father had a good year in business, he would turn to Mr. Wheeler, and Mr. Wheeler would say, "You give me some money, I'll get you some Bordeaux First Growth." In the 1950s. And that interest in wine blossomed. So my wife has this memory of first time she met my parents being given a Magnum of 1961 Burgundy to taste. Enfant Jesus. So I got lucky drinking good wine from a fairly early age.
Yeah.
And perhaps that memory stayed me through the university years of drinking, sweet Spanish wine, Matthias Rosé, Liefrau milk, Black Tower, the now not totally despised, but the now largely despised branded wines of the 1980s, 1970s, 1980s.
Yeah.
Sweet, nasty stuff.
Yeah. And so, and the other question about background I wanted to ask you was, you go back to school in your 60s. What was that like? I mean, was there were you nervous about that? Did you feel odd? Clearly, surely the oldest guy in the program. Right?
Well, I mean, yes and no. There were one or two other people similar sort of age doing similar sorts of things. It was a dissertation-based program, so in a sense, I was not, I was invisible. Going into the graduate common room, yes, that was an interesting experience. But no, I found it hugely rewarding. And then, because I did a doctorate in Oxford, it's been one of the great joys of the process is that you're interacting at seminars and others with people from 20 to 80.
Sure.
And it's just so refreshing.
Yeah.
So much fun to do. And without it, I'm sure I'd be a sort of grumpy old man.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I always say that I think one of the great benefits of the teaching profession is teaching at a university is you're always sitting in the classroom with people, in their 20s and some in the 30s, and you get this range of ages and backgrounds, and it's great.
It is, and you come across people with such sparkling intelligence. You think, wow, it's just always inspiring.
Yeah, sure. So how did you when you did your master's, that was already on Champagne?
Yeah,
that was all right. So you went to Oxford with the intention of continuing on, and
because I've lived in Oxford, or we've lived in Oxford as a family for the last 30 years.
Okay.
So my wife said, if you want to do a doctorate in Cambridge, we might as well get divorced now. Fair enough. I mean, she denied she ever said that, but I'm quite convinced it was certainly something very like that was said.
So you got the idea.
So I got the idea. Yeah. I got the message clear and strong, and found a couple of very, very good supervisors. They didn't know very much about wine when they started. They now probably know rather more, but they were an English social historian and a French social and family historian.
Who were they?
English social historian, architectural historian is William White, Professor the Reverend William White, who's a remarkable man, just become chairman of the Blue Plaque Society in England, which is, if you walk around London, you'll see blue plaques about the size of a bit bigger than a dinner plate, white lettering on buildings, and they celebrate famous inhabitants of those buildings. Oh. So everything, from suffragettes to rock stars. Yeah, find. And the other one was Christina de Bellaigue, who is a French family and social historian.
Okay.
So between them, they covered off the two sides, and I mean it was great having them as supervisors. I brought the Champagne knowledge, but they helped me just to fine tune the dissertation and to point out the horrible errors in the of logic or citation or whatever else.
Yeah, well, I think that's something. I kind of had a similar situation. My two supervisors in my program didn't know anything about drugs. I was working on cannabis. They didn't know anything about it. I had a third outside mentor, Paul Gutenberg, who was working on drugs. But I think sometimes it's an advantage where a couple of the people don't know exactly your topic, but they know the broader history that you're working with. Yeah. And so you can bring things to them, and then they put it in the right context so it doesn't end up too narrow. Yeah.
And because they're seeing it, as it were, afresh, they they can spot where the holes in the argument are so much more effectively than somebody who who in a sense knows it all already and will have formed a view. So it was a great experience as far as I was concerned, working with these guys and with Professor Peter Mandler in Cambridge as well. So I owe all three of them a huge debt.
Yeah. So so you finish, the book comes out. It's been a success. You're getting invited to all sorts of things. What are you teaching now at all, or what?
No, I'm researching. Carrying on researching and writing, but at the moment I'm very much occupied by two projects which I've become part of, fairly central part of. One is the city of Verona, which has Italy's biggest wine fair, Vinitaly, every year, and is of course a tourist city because of Romeo and Juliet's balcony. They have secured, I think it's 15 million euros or $50 million, I can't remember, to build a new wine museum, absolutely as a rival to the Bordeaux's Cité du Vin. But this is a museum of wine and culture. So it's not, and I don't want to dismiss the Cité du Vin because it's a great experience, but an awful lot of wine museums have, here's an ancient Roman pair of secateurs, here's a barrel, here's a this, here's a that. What they don't do, they show you the artifacts of the trade. They don't explain really why it is that wine has come to occupy such a powerful place in society. What were the origins of wine? How do they play into human desires? How do they play into cultural movements? So what we're trying to do is a museum of wine and culture. And that's our brief. So I'm working on that, writing. What we're doing is writing the briefs for a museum making team, an Italian museum making team, who will take what we've written and use it as a sort of the spine, the backbone to the museum artifacts or experiences that they will create.
Oh, that's
so
great.
we're looking to have. What I would like to have is. Is an avatar of Bacchus or Dionysus or Siduri, who's in the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's probably the world's first barkeep, possibly the world's first winemaker. It's very, the epic is hard to decipher, but have them take the visitors round. Make the thing
cool.
much more of an experience.
Yeah. You're the perfect guy for that.
So there's about 6 or 8 of us on this team.
Yeah. And who are there other historians on that team? Or is it?
There's a French historian, Olivier Jacquet, who's a historian based in Burgundy. There's an English master of wine who's also based in Burgundy, who's a professor of business studies there, but has written extensively on wine and culture. And we've collaborated on a number of things. There's a professor of French studies at Melbourne, Professor Jackie Dutton. We have sociologists, anthropologists, geographers working on the project. So we've brought together a team of people covering, not every discipline, but covering a range of disciplines within the humanities.
That's terrific. Who organized this?
The initial contact was through Steve Charters, Master of Wine in Dijon. And I think it was kicked off by the Academy of Wine Business Research, which Steve plays a big part in, which I belong to and been part of for a number of years. We had a conference in Verona last year, and the rector of the university, I think, identified Steve as really a key person to work on this, because he's written books on wine and culture. Together, he and I and a bunch of others edited the Routledge Handbook of Wine and Culture, which has again got contributors across that complete interdisciplinary space.
Yeah.
I think Diego found Steve, and Steve then recruited Jackie, recruited me, and then we built up a team, a broader team slowly around that. And that same group of 3 of us, Steve, Jackie and myself, we're working on another project, which is the Pinot Noir project, which developed from an idea of Jackie's or an experience of Jackie's, is that if you look at wine celebrations around the world, the Pinot Noir celebrations are something very special. They attract some very high-end consumers. And what anecdotally one observes is that Pinot Noir has been long known as the heartbreak grape because it's very difficult to grow. You need just the right balance of climatic conditions. It's quite hard to ripen effectively, but if it gets too hot, it over-ripens very quickly. So it's a really narrow window you have to work in, and which is why it's prone to disease as well. So the heartbreak grape. And yet, anecdotally, what we observe is that when tech bros or medics make it big and suddenly have money to burn, and they think wine is an interest, they'd like to set up a vineyard, they seem to set up Pinot Noir vineyards. Huh. So it's just this challenge.
Yeah.
And what we're interested in is the way in which Pinot Noir, for this conference anyway, symposium that we're running in Oxford, is Pinot Noir an identity. What it is about Pinot Noir that people gives them identity as winemakers. So a question would be, could you use robots or AI in your Pinot Noir vineyard and still call yourself a Pinot Noir winemaker? Or do you have to be a craftsman instead? The craft versus science debate. Look at the way in which Pinot Noir has emerged from being a grape in Burgundy wine and not really known in the 19th century. You find different names for it. Nobody uses those names. Burgundy, yes. But then Burgundy becomes adopted by the Australians, by the Americans, in the period before those names were controlled and given legal status. So Pinot Noir starts to emerge from the shadows of Burgundy and become a valued grape in its own right. So we're fascinated by those sorts of issues.
Isn't it made super popular too by the movie Sideways? Is that Pinot Noir?
Absolutely,
that's
Pinot
right?
Noir. Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And that's another aspect of it. Why that grape? I mean, you can sort of explain it, but because it's linked to the character of, is it the guy that Paul Giamatti plays? Whose name I forget again. I don't
remember the name either.
But he sees in that wine something of himself with all his various foibles and faults.
Oh yeah, sure. That's interesting.
So it's just what we want to do is, in the longer term, is to create a sort of really a database for those growing Pinot Noir grapes, making wine, selling it. So across the whole value chain, from the grape to the glass, that cliche, but looking at all the players in that space.
Yeah.
See what it is that Pinot Noir signifies. Why do they choose it? What vines to grow? What varieties to grow? How you grow them? How you market it? How you write about it? How you cook with it? What foods it goes with? All those sorts of questions start to come up. So we want to create a database of knowledge that people can tap into.
Wow, it's really fascinating. Yeah, and how did that start? Just out of your work together on the Verona project?
You'd have to ask Jackie that as well. I mean, I think she's been to a number of these celebrations.
Okay.
She runs she's run major food festivals in Australia as well.
Okay.
And Australia being one of the big sources of high-end Pinot Noir and some Mornington Peninsula, she's been to those events. Okay. She's well connected into that world, and I think she just observed this and thought, that's interesting. Why?
Yeah.
What is it about this variety? Because there are celebrations of there's International Grenache Day, there's other celebrations, there are the local communities of the Tastevin du various sorts in Burgundy, Coteau du Champenois, etc., etc. There are lots of these regionally based groups, but this idea of broadening it out is, I think, a new one. And The symposium in Oxford is designed to be a couple of days of what anybody on the academic side will recognise as standard conferencing, papers, presentations, workshops, round tables. But on the third morning, the Saturday, we'll have a workshop which really is a generative exercise. What, as a group of people, what do we want this project to become? What could it become?
Yeah.
What are the potential visions that we need to work towards? What's the implications then for where we invest our time and effort? And how do we create this worldwide community? What is it that we need to do to link it together? How often do we meet? What do we discuss? All those sorts of questions.
Yeah.
So that, in my experience, is you get a little bit of that at the Dublin Food Symposium. Often, again, that sort of last morning, where do we go next? What's the next topic? But this is taking that, I hope, to another different level. So watch this space.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Wow, it's really interesting. So basically, you're retired but super busy.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Who would want to retire?
Well, Graham, this has been great. Anything else? Anything we missed?
I don't think so, Isaac. No, that's been great talking to you.
Well, thanks a lot. I appreciate you coming on.
It's a pleasure.
All right.
All right, there you go. Interesting story, right? I didn't know anything about champagne, and I found the whole thing really fascinating. And I find branding really, really interesting. In the present day, sometimes it makes me want to barf, but it's really fascinating how they make us desire things. They make us want things. Graham was one of those people. He made us want things. Reading his book does make me want to drink champagne. This is what happens sometimes when you read these books about drugs. You're like, that sounds pretty good. I'd like to try some of that champagne. Anyway, it was a lot of fun. My thanks to Graham for coming on. My thanks to you for putting up with my... If you got this far, my thanks to you for putting up with my funky voice on that interview with the echoey sound. The next one will be recorded right here in the quiet confines of my basement. So you have that to look forward to. In the meantime, check us out on Instagram. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. But check us out on Instagram. Repost things. Spread the word about History on Drugs. This is a place for great conversations, just for the sake of great conversations and talking to smart, knowledgeable, kind people, which sure is different than a lot of the spaces out there in the real world, isn't it? Yeah, sure is. So, there you go. Until next time, stay safe, stay warm, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.